Hello, welcome to this presentation. This presentation is part of my submission for the subject corporate governance. Corporate governance is a very interesting topic, and I'm making this presentation for the benefit for the board of a newly listed entity, that is Tab Limited, as their newly appointed company secretary. This presentation shall give the board a brief overview of some of the important aspects of corporate governance. So, welcome board members. For the better understanding of corporate governance and in the interest of time, I have listed some agenda items for our today's discussion. Let's have a look at these agenda items one by one. So let's get started. In this slide, we can see that I have listed down the agenda items. Some of the important aspects that we need to cover is what is corporate governance, firstly, what is the definition of corporate governance, what is the regulations towards management of corporate governance procedure. So that has been listed down by ASX. Also, we'll touch base on board performance assessment, how a board performance can be assessed. Also, there's the discussion about whether the role of the chair and the CEO, whether it should be separate or it can be held by one person. We'll try and understand the pros and cons for that. And also, lastly, to drive home the importance of corporate governance, I have included a case study on British Petroleum Company, which is very useful in understanding the cascading effects of how a lapse in corporate governance can affect not just the company, but different stakeholders at large. So, what is corporate governance? Corporate governance refers to the way in which companies are governed and to what purpose. It identifies who has power and accountability and who makes decisions. Good corporate governance means that the process of disclosure and transparency is followed so as to provide the regulators, the shareholders, the general public with precise and accurate information about the financial, operational, and other aspects of the company. Most companies will always strive to have exceptional corporate governance. As for stakeholders, it is not enough just for the company to be profitable. It is important now that for as a good corporate governance citizenship should be established through environmental awareness, ethical behavior, and sound corporate practice. So the next line talks about the ASX corporate governance principles and recommendations. These principles and recommendations are not mandatory, and basically they are a soft law. The approach here is that if you are not following these principles and recommendations, then why not? The copy of this corporate governance principles and recommendations is available on the website of the ASX, and I can forward a copy to you board members after this meeting. But let's just quickly touch base on the 8 important principles and just have a bit of pointers on that. The first is about laying a solid foundation. It means that there should be disclosures, there should be regular reporting to the stock exchange. The second point talks about how the board should be structured. It should be it should have like independent directors, non-executive directors, women directors, and they all should be qualified and they should add value at the end of the day to the company. It is important that all the board members should act like lawfully, ethically, and should be responsible. And they should make sure that these corporate reports are disclosed transparently and there are no false or misleading statements going to the stakeholders. These disclosures should also be done like regularly if there is any change in the board member, if there are any corporate actions that the company is going to take, these disclosures should go timely to the stock exchange. And not to forget the rights of the shareholders. They have a right to inspect the records of the company, to receive annual report copies, to attend shareholders' meetings, and these rights should be respected and adhered to. And the board should also understand the risk that can possibly now with the pandemic we understand that any type of risk that can come, and the board needs to be prepared and make sure that there are procedures to manage those risks. And the last is about remunerate fairly and responsibility. So the board members should make sure that all the members and also the employees are remunerated fairly and responsibly. Now, let's talk about the board performance assessment. In order to enable the board to determine that it is effectively performing its role, meeting its goals, a set of procedures should be established for assessing performance. Board performance assessment is therefore a central part of an effective system of corporate governance. I know it's a difficult task to measure your own performance and may cause discomfort to some of the board members, as sometimes they can be senior, experienced members, or could be founders who may have started the company from scratch and may take this like a test. However, please understand that this exercise is really effective in analyzing the board and would help establish a cohesive board for the betterment of the organization. This board performance is a yearly exercise for the board, and as a team, as an individual board member, and as a chair, this exercise can be performed. The chart to the left here suggests the framework for the assessment, and we need to answer the questions to design an appropriate procedure. This assessment could be done either internally within the company itself, or external consultants can be engaged. And they are mostly in the form of interviews or in the form of surveys. So, the question of whether the roles of chairman and chief executive officer should be held by separate individuals has long been a source of conversations and sometimes conflicts in boardrooms and among shareholders. The shift away from combining the two roles stems from the philosophy of accountability and corporate responsibility. By separating them, a company can clearly distinguish management authority from board authority and empower the chairman and CEO to pursue their respective duties without concern that interests in one position might negatively influence the other. There was a comment made by Bennett Jenkins in New York Times article where he says that one of the major functions of the board is to supervise management. If the chairman of the board is also in management, then he is in effect marking his own exam papers. So these show in favor that the chairman and the CEO positions should be separate. However, there are arguments that say that there is no clear evidence that separate roles will lead to higher performance. And if the chair is led by a non executive director, then it can lead to inefficiency. Sometimes it is found that if on offer the CEO and the chair position is combined, you can get the best talents out there. So as a company, we need to decide what works for us, whether having them separate or whether assigning it to the same person, depending upon the company's philosophy in terms of how the management should work. We can then effectively take a decision about that. The next slide, we come to the end of our presentation, and it talks about the British Petroleum Company's corporate governance failure. So there was a fire explosion, and it set off the largest oil spills in the history of US operations. 4.9 billion barrels of oil was gushed into Gulf waters. The company pleaded guilty to 11 accounts of felony manslaughter and agreed to pay taxes to cover the consequences. The only reason why this happened was BP cut cost on safety, and that led to cascading effects. The company's share prices fell, other petroleum companies were affected, fishery industry was affected because of this. There was environmental hazard. So one small um, error can lead to a highly damaging possibility for not just the company but all the stakeholders out there. So corporate governance efforts should solely not be based to the interest of stakeholders or suppliers but also account for workplace risk. So we need to, as I said in the beginning, it's not just the shareholders value or what the stock exchange price or what the profitability of the company means. Corporate governance should focus on all aspects, internal, external, and possible risks, so that can lead to a good corporate governance practice. I hope you liked the presentation. Thank you.